Hello and welcome to Driving the Conversation, the collision repair industry podcast series powered by ICAR, a not-for-profit organization designed to support the evolving needs of the collision repair industry with a focus on improving the quality, safety, and efficiency of auto collision repair for the ultimate benefit of the consumer. I'm your host, Stacey Moellering. Welcome. I'm Associate Vice President of Marketing and Segment Development for ICAR, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. We have such an important and timely discussion planned for anyone in the collision repair industry who may be caught during this pandemic thinking, well, business might be a little slower, and I'd like to take some time to get my tech certified with some of the new ICAR courses. But they're virtually conducted right now and we can't do hands-on training. So what do I do? Can I still get the same educational value out of the online courses? And is that return on investment there? So in the event that you don't know the scale of ICAR's impact on supporting the entire industry, I'd like to share with you some stats about ICAR, about the variety of services and educational solutions that are offered. So ICAR provides collision repair training to more than 14,000 individual businesses and more than 91,000 students annually. ICAR offers 275 and more growing courses in our portfolio that are delivered through live, online, virtual, and in-shop hands-on formats. We provide technical resources to the industry through the Repairability Technical Support Portal on ICAR's website at i-car.com/RTS. And ICAR serves the industry with more than 2,200 volunteers, instructors, and staff. And that comes through the support of many local committees across the U.S. So suffice it to say that ICAR is hugely invested in providing best-in-class training and education surrounding the auto collision repair industry. And this past March, educational systems all over the world, including ICAR, were forced to immediately shift gears and convert courses from the traditional live classroom-based educational format to online and virtual. So we went to one of the largest universities in the Midwest and identified Christine Renner, who is Vice Probost for Instructional Development and Innovation, Director of the Robert and Mary Pugh Faculty Teaching and Learning Center at Grand Valley State University in Allendale, Michigan. And she's going to join us to discuss this topic even further. Christine, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Stacey.
So why don't we just start off? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at the university, and we'll get into talking about some of these pivots that you've had to take at Grand Valley.
Sure. No, that sounds great. My title is Vice Provost for Instructional Development and Innovation. And what that means is that I'm part of the academic team that delivers education to our students. I also direct the Robert and Mary Pugh Faculty Teaching and Learning Center, and we provide professional development for all of the faculty at Grand Valley, from new faculty to everyone really who is a continuous learner about how best to educate. So my team provides workshops, consultations. We train faculty to teach better face-to-face and online.
So obviously with COVID-19 hitting universities across the country earlier this year and digital learning going mainstream really in a big hurry, how did that impact your current educational practices, your models, and the processes that you're using going forward now?
Sure. Now, 2020 has really been the year of change and swift change for sure. And I think what we're finding is that whenever we go back to normal, education is not necessarily going to be the same. So I think some of the lessons that we have learned in 2020 really are about new models of teaching. Using what we know best works in an online environment. Even when we're going back to face-to-face, there's some things that we're just going to stay online for because it really works better. We also learned how to be flexible and adaptable, and that's going to stay with us. Being able to change based on changing circumstances for not only educators, but our students, that's really going to be important. And I think the other thing that we've had to do is learn to become more resilient, and that is going to stay with us, really helping learners, try something new, make a mistake, pick themselves up, deal with the uncertainty, and really kind of help each other move forward. So that idea of building resilience in our learners, that's going to stick with us.
So I had a short time at Grand Valley State University early in my collegiate career. It was a campus that I was attending for a couple years out in Allendale. And it's a beautiful campus. There's so many, opportunities to engage with learning, to do things hands-on, to really have that experiential part in that aspect of learning, which helps retention. So from your perspective, Christine, how has Grand Valley ensured that same level of quality learning through the online courses versus that traditional in-classroom activity? And what can our industry learn from that?
No, absolutely. I think what we had to do is really step back and take some time and learn how best to teach online. So our faculty spent a lot of time reading, taking workshops, working with one another, kind of sharing ideas of how to deliver content online. And so I think that idea of continuing learning, that's going to definitely, we had to do that. And I think everybody's going to have to do that as well. The other, I think, lesson that we learned as part of that is, in terms of delivering high quality education, is that to plan an online course takes time, and sometimes more time than a face-to-face course. So allowing that time to plan has been really important. And I think no matter what the industry, keeping an open communication with learners is really important, and making sure that the educators are getting feedback from the students about how things are going. Again, it just takes a little bit more intentionality in an online environment.
Yeah, so let's talk about the instructors and your professors. Obviously it is a huge pivot, and you talk about the extra time needed to prepare for classes in an online format. And that might be something that learners underestimate, just how much more time that does take. And it's a disruption. It's a disruption for the educators.
Right.
So what do you say to your educators and your professors surrounding how best they should go about teaching? And what are some of those tips to really ensure that top-notch online learning environment?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think really one of the first things that we tell people is to embrace online learning and not really think of it as a compromise. I think that's really an important message. Online learning is different, but it is, time and again, it's shown to be equally effective for lots of learning. So I think that's really important. And I think that intentionality, that piece, we really think that it's so important to take time to make sure you're building relationships with students, and making sure that open communication kind of keeps going as well.
And that's got to be tough in an online format, because your interaction before or after class might be different. You might have to be much more purposeful in setting up that time. And I imagine that actually is something that, students need to learn how to maximize their own ability to be successful in these formats.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at that, what can students do to maximize their learning, both online and in a virtual live format?
No, absolutely. And I think the advice that we give to students is very much similar to what we would tell educators as well. And really, the first thing is about time management. It's really easy to let things slide, to kind of put it on the back burner since you don't have to go to a class, to kind of make sure that you keep up with a class and make sure that you're setting aside a schedule to spend some time with a class. The other part that's really important for students to understand is that you have to be more self-directed. Somebody's not telling you, okay, come and take this exam at this particular time. So really being self-directed and making sure that you can motivate yourself to learn, and find ways to spend some time, and not only spending time with the class, but being self-directed enough to know when you need to ask for help, because you really have to do that yourself. And the last thing is to find a quiet space or a dedicated space for learning. I think a lot of us, as we've been working remotely, we have laptops, we can go sit out in the yard, we can go sit at the kitchen table, but it's really important to have a place that's quiet and that's dedicated to that learning. And so that everybody else around you knows that, okay, that's the time for this class and it needs to be quiet and organized and everything is right there. So I think that's time and space is really more important.
And I have to tell you from my personal experience, I have 4 children and I'm married to an educator. And when we had to pivot to all being at home, what you're talking about is absolutely what I observed and witnessed, with my children, that ability to gain proficiency in the online e-learning format. It comes with time, it comes with practice, but it certainly is going to be fueled, and those that are motivated are going to be the most successful.
Right. No, absolutely.
So, you talked a little bit about when we first started chatting here about there being some content that's moved to online that may likely stay online.
Mm-hmm.
So, as educators, where do you see your learning environments heading over the next 5 years?
The learning environments are going to be different. Things are not going to be the same. They're going to be more flexible. And I think one of the challenging things for all of us as educators is in that flexibility is that learners have a choice whether they come to a face-to-face session or whether they learn online. So that's really different because educators have been the ones in control to say this is where you need to be and when. So I think that learning environment is going to become much more flexible. And like I said, we'll keep what works really well online. And what's going to become even more important is that time that we are able to come together face to face, that is really quality, highly interactive time. So I think it's a challenge to design that well.
Yeah, and I imagine you're probably having to balance a lot of different variables, especially in the collegiate level, because you have different, curriculum, different learning needs for different, obviously degree paths. But what I love about this conversation, Christine, is that even though, we're in the collision repair industry, ICAR, we work, primarily with collision repair training and solutions. But what we're talking about today is really applicable to any learning situation, any training situation.
Absolutely.
So with that in mind, is there any misinformation or myths, that's about an online or a virtual education that we could just set the record straight for our listeners?
Absolutely. And I think the first thing I do hear from time to time, people will say, well, online learning is inferior. It's just not the same. And it's not true. There's a big body of evidence that shows that learning online can be as effective, if not more effective, than learning in face-to-face. And I think the second thing that I do hear from instructors is that, well, it's just not going to be the same in terms of building relationships with my students. I'm not going to know them. They're not going to know me. And again, it's not impersonal. It doesn't have to be. But again, it takes some intentionality. There are plenty of ways for an educator to put in their own sense of humor and their personality into the course, and to also get to know the students as well. But it's a little different and it takes effort, but it doesn't have to be impersonal.
So, Christine, I find it really fascinating what you're talking about with that online environment being just as impactful as, say, an in-class or instructor-led live classroom. Are there things that Grand Valley is able to do to really bring a different level of engagement to the online environment? And how are students going to be looking at Grand Valley's online curriculum and thinking that that's going to help them progress through their curriculum and through their degree path?
No, that's a great question. And I think some of the foundational principles of a Grand Valley education are that students learn how to become collaborative and also develop their communication skills. And there are some great online methods for engaging students in group work, for example. So you don't all need to be in the same physical space, but there are plenty of ways to develop collaborative learning skills and teamwork in an online environment through very intensive projects and presentations. So that's one thing that comes to mind. And the second is really how to think critically. That's a big part of a Grand Valley education, and how to communicate well. All of those skills are really essential in an online environment, either whether that's an online environment for work or for learning. And I think being able to give presentations and to communicate well in writing, all of those are easily translatable to the online environment.
Well, that's great insight, and I appreciate you sharing that because it is something that will definitely help our listeners. It helps our industry understand that building that culture of learning is about, obviously having high quality training available to them, but it's also about the student and how the student interacts with their training and with their learning, and they really take that level of ownership is what I hear you sharing with us today.
Yeah.
So we've come to the end here. Are there any other final thoughts that you have for our listeners, things that we can learn from your expertise in the education field?
Sure. And I think one of the things that we've been working on is to help educators understand that this is a stressful time. There's so many reasons why people are under stress. And what we know from brain science is that stress impacts learning, so that it's harder to learn, it's harder to, memory is affected, that time management, remembering deadlines, all of that is significantly affected by stress. So what we are helping our educators do better is kind of help students not only manage that stress, but be a little bit more patient with one another, acknowledging that we're all under stress, and finding ways to help each other move forward in kind of a very compassionate way. So we don't always talk about kind of compassion and even the effects of stress in education. Some of those things have been invisible. So that's just something I wanted to add that's very much on our minds and in the work that I am doing.
Well, certainly that comes to life in the education segment, and it sounds like it's really sound advice for life in general right now.
Absolutely. Take care of yourselves. Yes.
Definitely. All right, Christine. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
No, you're very welcome. It was a pleasure talking with you, Stacey.
All right. So this concludes ICAR's Driving the Conversation podcast on learning pivots, how education changes during a pandemic, with Grand Valley State University's Vice Provost, Instructional Development and Education, Christine Renner. Be sure to check out the virtual issue of ICAR's Collision Reporter magazine, which features a guest editorial by Christine, along with an honest and open roundtable panel discussion on the value of education and training in our own industry with both shop technicians and shop owners. There's so much more. You don't want to miss it. So check out these stories by visiting i-car.com/collision reporter/virtual. I'm Stacey Moellering. Thank you for tuning in today.